I've wanted to make a Dark Souls video for a while now, but it seemed a bit overdone. It seems that every game reviewer and video essayist has talked about their experience going through the adventure through Lordran. I remember this type of video being oversaturated online as far back as 2017. Either it'd be a personal anecdote describing the challenge and satisfaction of completing this gauntlet, or the deeper videos would get into the game's themes of nihilism and existentialism. And most of these other videos are honestly pretty great, so I don't want to just repeat what these other videos have said. I want to discuss what Dark Souls means on a larger scale, not just about depression or an individual overcoming struggle, but what Dark Souls says about our society and Western civilization more broadly. I'm gonna start, paradoxically, at the end of the game to illustrate this point. Not that it's entirely necessary for me to say, but, spoiler warning, I will be revealing both endings of Dark Souls. Personally, I don't believe spoilers ruin the game, and with how cryptic the lore is, if anything, it raises more questions than answers anyway. The endings are as such. First, an ending where you keep the fire going, and second, an ending where you let the flame die out. So one interpretation of this is that what we are looking at is the Enlightenment versus the Dark Age. The Western world today is very much a product of the Enlightenment, which is an era of science, progress, and reason, whereas a Dark Age would represent a rejection of these things. Viewed in this lens, the endings of Dark Souls would represent whether you, the player, believe this Enlightenment project is worth continuing or should just be abandoned altogether, ushering in a new Dark Age. Concerning science, one of the bosses, Seath the Scaleless, is a pale dragon who betrayed his own kin.
And Seath the Scaleless betrayed his own, and the dragons were no more. Thus began the Age of Fire.
He massacred them in pursuit of his own immortality. He presides over the Duke's archives, a library full of knowledge, which is also the home of horrific Lovecraftian abominations, which are the results of Seath's scientific experiments. This is strike one against the Enlightenment. It would make one pause and reflect on how warped this pursuit of science can become. Seath did find a secret to immortality, but it was fragile and shatters anyway. What is this pursuit even for? Do the ends really justify the means? On to progress. We begin the game after Oscar releases us from our prison cell, kicking off the events of Dark Souls. With his dying wish, he asks us to ring the Bell of Awakening.
I have failed in my mission, but perhaps you can keep the torch lit. There is an old saying in my family, "Thou who art undead art chosen. In thine exodus from the undead asylum maketh pilgrimage to the land of ancient lords. When thou ringest the Bell of Awakening, the fate of the undead thou shalt know."
However, once we escape the asylum, the crestfallen warrior informs us that there are in fact two Bells of Awakening.
There are actually two Bells of Awakening. One's up above in the undead church. The other is far, far below, in the ruins at the base of Blight Town.
What starts off as sounding like a simple favor to honor a fallen comrade ends up being quite the daunting task. The first bell sits atop a church, which is guarded by killer, fire-breathing gargoyles and a town of undead residents who want you destroyed. And the second bell is significantly more difficult than that, residing in the depths of Blighttown, which is a death sentence to most. Upon ringing both bells, a gate is now open, which gives you access to Sen's fortress, which leads you to Anor Londo. In Anor Londo, you must defeat Ornstein and Smo and gain access to the Lord Vessel. But I am getting ahead of myself. After both bells have been rung, a new character enters the hub world, Frampt.
Do you seek such enlightenment?
Frampt tells you about the Lord Vessel, and that you also need to get 4 Lord Souls to place in the Lord Vessel in order to save Lordran by killing Gwyn and keeping the flame going, preventing the oncoming Dark Age.
Fill the vessel with powerful souls. All of their souls are required to satiate the Lord Vessel.
This begs the question if Oscar knew what he was setting you up for, or if he was just as oblivious as you were. Was he aware of the massive scale of his goal? Furthermore, we meet another serpent, Kath, who tells us that the first serpent, Frampt, was lying to us. According to Kath, Frampt is using us for his own personal gain, and we should instead let the flame die and bring about the Age of Dark.
I seek to right the wrongs of the past, to discover our true Lord. But the other serpent, Frampt, lost his sense.
It should be noted that while every single player will encounter Frampt, most players will never meet Kath. Kath only appears if you defeat the hardest of the 4 lords, the 4 kings, before the other 3 lords, and also do so prior to placing the Lord Vessel. This makes it nearly impossible for a first-time player to encounter Kath, unless it's a very unlikely accident or the player is using a guide of some sort. This means many players just take Frampt at face value. But what if Kath is right? What if sacrificing ourselves to keep the flame alive is just us, the chosen undead, being a useful idiot for someone else's gain? At the very least, Kath's inclusion in the game should instill some doubt in us about how noble this self-immolation actually is. That's Strike 2. As for reason, it is a consistent theme in Dark Souls. The character, Big Hat Logan, goes mad in a pursuit of knowledge. And as many have discussed the game's depression theme, many characters are looking for a reason to keep going.
Why? Why? After all this searching, I still cannot find it.
This reason is what drives us, the chosen undead, to persevere, but also what drives Solaire to depression and then madness.
Finally, I have my very own son. I am the son. I've done it. I have. Yes, I did it. I did.
As he was struggling to find a reason, Solaire loved the sun and deeply admired it.
Oh, hello there. I will stay behind to gaze at the sun. The sun is a wondrous body, like a magnificent father. If only I could be so grossly incandescent.
Later in the game, we discover that the sun in Anor Londo is fake.
Thou that tarnisheth the godmother's image, I am Gwyndolin. And thy transgression shall not go unpunished. Thou shalt perish in the twilight of Anor Londo.
How can we know our reason isn't leading us to artificial illumination, fake enlightenment? Does the pursuit of truth and our reasoning for what we do end up leading us to madness? Again, if our reason leads us to self-immolation in the end, is that reason reasonable? Strike 3. It may seem like I am just leading to the conclusion that the Dark Age is the good ending, or at least the lesser evil. The Enlightenment is an artificial illumination after all. Reason leads to madness. Science does monstrous things. And our progress ultimately leads to suicide, regardless of how simple or noble the goal seemed to begin with. However, the Dark Age is also terrifying. In the DLC, we see what happens to those exposed to the dark. One cannot sensibly usher in the Dark Age with much enthusiasm. If Frampt was lying to us, who's to say that Kath wasn't also a liar? They both could be lying snakes. Maybe the current world is bad, but the dark is even worse. Who knows? But what is known is that the dark is inevitable. The Dark Age will come. It is just a matter of when. Keeping the flame alive is just a means to prolong this enlightenment. Given all this, what is the best choice? Maybe it's to choose nothing at all. Perhaps the chosen undead was better off left in his prison cell. But despite the bleak picture that Dark Souls shows us, there are still ways to view the endings positively. A Nietzschean perspective, for example. Nietzsche is interpreted and misinterpreted in several different ways, but there are two major points Nietzsche offers that are applicable to Dark Souls. These are life affirmation and the eternal return. These concepts are also tied together. The eternal return exists in order to affirm life. The eternal return is a thought experiment suggesting that life repeats over and over in the exact same way. There is no afterlife, nor is there merely nothing after death, but your life repeats. The idea behind this is that it forces you to confront the current reality. You cannot hope for heaven, nor the simple, sweet release of death. All there is the here and now, forever. If the idea of the eternal return sounds like hell and a nightmare, it indicates that you are not living life to the fullest. It takes a certain individual to still affirm life in this circumstance. The person who can say they'd be happy to live their life again exactly the same way, over and over again, is a truly life-affirming person. They aren't just waiting to die or expecting a reward for their suffering. They think things are perfect as they are. This is a noble goal, even if quite difficult. It should be noted that when you complete Dark Souls, it goes into New Game Plus mode, and you start the game over from the beginning. Mind you, it's not the exact thing over and over again as you keep your level and equipment, and the game increases in difficulty, but I still think this game loop ties into the idea of the eternal return. The eternal return could also influence your decision at the end of the game. If after everything you have seen throughout Lordran, you still think this world is worth maintaining, you may keep the flame alive as the ultimate life-affirming act, whereas the resentful who wish the world to end will choose the Dark Age ending. Of course, if the eternal return is true, and the world just resets regardless of your choice, then maybe the choice is irrelevant anyway. It could also be just as life-affirming to choose the dark ending, since the dark is inevitable and all things come to an end. Why not usher in the Dark Age yourself? What is more life-affirming than that? A complete acceptance of how ephemeral everything is. The world of Dark Souls is, if not overtly nihilistic, highly hints at that. And the only true goal of Dark Souls is to overcome nihilism. This is why going hollow is a thing throughout the adventure. Those who've gone hollow are those who have given up, those who have succumbed to nihilism. With the exception of the player character, everyone who goes hollow seems to enter a zombified state. You could view it as ludonarrative dissonance that the player is the only one exempt from this rule. But I say, as long as one still has the will to persevere, they are not fully hollow. If giving up is going hollow, then the fact you are still playing means you have not given up, nor gone hollow completely. The line, "Don't you dare go hollow," is synonymous with "don't give up." Our world is just like Lordran. It appears we have reached a point where the Enlightenment era is at an end, the flame is dying out, and the age of dark is slowly creeping up on us. Values that our civilization holds dear, whether legitimately or just nominally, things like science, progress, reason, etc., are starting to be criticized by more and more people, not just fringe reactionary writers. With a civilization increasingly succumbing to madness and zealotry, it's becoming more and more difficult to take sincere advocacy of Enlightenment values as anything other than trying to cling onto an old paradigm that is fading more and more each day. And I say this as someone who less than a decade ago had the utmost faith in these ideals. I don't celebrate the extinguishing of the flame, but neither do I intend on self-immolating to prolong the age of fire by a meager amount. It's hard to say which ending is the correct choice. The Dark Age is inevitable, but also a rather horrifying prospect. Nothing lasts forever. History is cyclical. The flame will burn out, but a new flame will emerge eventually. Despite this mess around us, life will go on, and the soaring heights will make up for the bleakest depths. This is our acculturation. It will continue. And all I have left to say is, don't you dare go hollow.